Across continents and cultures, one issue continues to ignite political tension and silent resistance: the construction of mosques. For millions of Muslims around the world, a mosque is far more than a structure. It is the center of faith, community, and identity. Yet the struggle to build one is anything but simple. Even though freedom of religion is etched into international law, many countries still obstruct mosque development. Some impose direct bans, others bury requests under endless bureaucracy, and many rely on subtle political barriers designed to slow progress without ever stating it openly. These decisions reveal deeper fears, questions of national identity, cultural unease, and security concerns that shape how societies view their Muslim minorities. Stay until the end, because the country in the #1 position doesn't just reject mosque construction. It reshapes its entire domestic policy to limit how visible Islam can be in public life. Let's begin and uncover the 12 countries that strictly prohibit the construction of mosques and the real reasons behind their restrictions. Before we dive in, remember to subscribe, like the video, and share your thoughts in the comments. Number 1, Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia often appears on this list as a surprise. Yet the kingdom known as the birthplace of Islam also enforces some of the most sweeping restrictions on religious construction anywhere in the world. Even with millions of pilgrims traveling to Mecca and Medina each year, the country maintains tight control over who may build places of worship and where they may exist. Within the Muslim population itself, these rules are sharply defined. Non-Saudi Sunni groups are not permitted to construct their own mosques, and Shia communities, particularly in the eastern region, regularly face long delays, denied applications, and limits on expanding existing sites. For many of these citizens, navigating the approval process becomes a prolonged struggle rather than a guaranteed religious right. Beyond internal divisions, the restrictions extend even further. The kingdom bans the construction of churches, temples, and any non-Muslim religious building entirely. Millions of foreign Christian and Hindu workers practice privately, often in concealed gatherings, aware that public worship could bring consequences. International rights organizations have repeatedly noted this pattern, pointing to a climate where non-Islamic expression must remain hidden from view. Saudi officials claim these measures preserve religious unity and safeguard the character of the state. Critics counter that the policies create an environment where religious diversity is controlled rather than tolerated, reinforcing a hierarchy of faith that limits personal freedom. These tensions reveal how a nation that is overwhelmingly Muslim can still impose strict boundaries on religious activity in order to centralize authority and maintain a singular public identity. Across the region, the ability to build a mosque or any sacred space carries more weight than construction permits or zoning rules. It reflects belonging, visibility, and acknowledgement in public life. And in Saudi Arabia, that recognition remains heavily regulated, allowed for some and withheld from others. Number 2, France. France publicly upholds freedom of religion, yet the reality on the ground tells a more complicated story. Despite hosting one of Europe's largest Muslim populations, the path to building or expanding mosques is tangled in dense layers of regulations and local resistance. Debates over secularism, identity, and the place of religion in public life shape nearly every stage of the approval process. Across the country, municipal officials rely on zoning rules, heritage protections, and neighborhood objections to halt new proposals. Even when a community demonstrates a clear need, mosque applications often stall behind paperwork, prolonged hearings, or planning demands that smaller congregations struggle to meet. Many Muslims are left to pray in crowded basements, converted storefronts, or temporary halls, not because of lack of faith, but because legal barriers overshadow practical solutions. Another significant obstacle is funding. France imposes strict limits on foreign financial support for religious construction, a rule meant to ensure transparency, but one that disproportionately affects Muslim groups that lack strong domestic donors. Without this support, large-scale projects frequently collapse before breaking ground. Critics argue that the system quietly reinforces unequal treatment, noting that other religious buildings often move through the approval process with far fewer complications. Supporters counter that these regulations preserve the country's strict model of secularism and prevent outside ideological influence. What remains clear is that mosque construction in France is rarely a straightforward endeavor. Every proposal is scrutinized, debated, and sometimes protested, turning a simple place of worship into a symbol of broader national tensions over culture, visibility, and belonging. Number 3, China. China's approach to Islam, most sharply visible in the Xinjiang region, has become one of the most criticized religious policies in the world. Over recent years, authorities have removed or demolished large numbers of mosques, replacing them with public squares, government buildings, or completely vacant land. Independent analyses of satellite imagery show the disappearance of historic prayer sites that once served as the heart of Muslim neighborhoods. Beijing describes these changes as part of modernization and urban restructuring, but the reality experienced by local communities tells a different story. Traditional Islamic features such as domes, arches, and minarets have been dismantled, leaving many surviving mosques unrecognizable or stripped down to plain, state-approved designs. Others remain locked, guarded, or heavily monitored. New construction is nearly impossible without direct authorization, and such approval is rarely granted. Even the mosques allowed to operate function under intense supervision, often managed or overseen by officials who regulate sermons, attendance, and community activity. Worshippers move through religious spaces under constant surveillance cameras and strict reporting requirements, creating an atmosphere of caution rather than devotion. These measures form part of a broader assimilation strategy aimed at reducing visible expressions of Islam and reinforcing an image of cultural uniformity. Public gatherings, religious study, and even personal symbols of faith, such as clothing or grooming traditions, have been limited in various regions. For Uyghurs, Hui Muslims, and other Islamic groups, daily life has shifted under layers of control that shape everything from communal worship to cultural identity. The ability to build or maintain a mosque has become a rare privilege, not a protected right, leaving Muslim visibility in China tightly restricted and increasingly confined to spaces approved and monitored by the state. Number 4, Myanmar. Myanmar remains one of the most restrictive environments for Muslims, with conditions especially harsh in regions where the Rohingya and other Islamic communities live. For years, authorities have targeted places of worship, particularly in Rakhine State, where numerous mosques have been shuttered, demolished, or left to decay under armed guard. Across many districts, new mosque construction is outright blocked, creating a climate of fear and uncertainty. Buildings that once served as community anchors now sit locked behind police barriers, leaving worshippers without safe spaces for prayer or gathering. Officials frame these actions as steps to protect public order, but the experiences shared by residents and displaced families tell a far more deliberate story. Refugees who fled to neighboring countries recount how mosques were burned or bulldozed during military operations, erasing not only structures but entire religious communities. Independent satellite analysis supports these accounts, revealing widespread destruction in areas that were once densely populated by Muslim families. In numerous towns, even small private prayer groups risk arrest or intimidation, forcing many to practice their faith quietly in homes or seek refuge abroad. With surveillance expanding and local restrictions tightening, Islamic life in Myanmar has been pushed into secrecy. For countless Muslims, abandoned mosques and stalled construction plans serve as daily reminders of a system designed to control their visibility and limit their presence. Religious buildings that once marked the center of community life now stand silent, locked, guarded, and inaccessible, reflecting the severe constraints placed on Muslim identity throughout the country. Number 5. Slovenia. Slovenia has a relatively small Muslim community, yet the country has spent decades struggling with the question of mosque construction, most visibly in the capital, Ljubljana. Efforts to establish a major mosque began generations ago, but political resistance, public debate, and cultural anxieties kept the project in limbo year after year. Nationalist groups and some local officials argued that a mosque would alter the city's character, while Muslim residents pressed simply for a place to worship with dignity. When groundbreaking finally happened, the construction moved slowly and under constant scrutiny. The project stretched on for years, surrounded by public hearings, legal debates, and periodic protests. By the time the mosque opened, the moment drew both celebration from supporters and fierce demonstrations from critics who claimed Slovenia's Christian identity was being challenged. Attempts to build additional mosques elsewhere have faced similar obstacles. Local councils frequently cite zoning restrictions, limited demand, or neighborhood concerns to block new proposals. Muslim organizations argue that these explanations mask deeper prejudice and make expansion virtually impossible. Even existing prayer spaces face heavy oversight. Some smaller facilities have been closed, and others function under strict monitoring, including security cameras placed inside worship areas. Rights groups and community leaders warn that these measures create a climate of pressure rather than safety. In modern Slovenia, constructing a new mosque requires layers of approvals that are rarely granted, and the ones already standing operate within tight boundaries. Although the nation formally recognizes religious freedom, the experience of its Muslim population shows how regulated and fragile that freedom can become when public acceptance is limited and institutional barriers remain firmly in place. Number 6. Lithuania. Lithuania has a long, unusual connection to Islam through its historic Tatar communities, small groups that have lived in the region for centuries. Despite this deep-rooted presence, modern attempts to build new mosques face a maze of opposition and bureaucratic delays. Although the country officially recognizes the rights of its Muslim citizens, the reality of securing approval for new religious buildings is far more complicated. Recent proposals frequently stall before reaching construction. In one well-known case, plans for a mosque were halted indefinitely after residents claimed it would alter the cultural identity of their town. Many Muslims still rely on aging wooden mosques or improvised prayer spaces set up in converted houses or community buildings, highlighting how limited the available facilities are. The growing population of foreign students, workers, and long-term residents has made this shortage even more visible. Efforts to expand existing mosques or establish new ones often run into zoning restrictions, lengthy permit reviews, and objections from civic groups demanding additional studies on heritage or environmental impact. Local officials routinely frame these roadblocks as cultural preservation, even when congregations are small, peaceful, and organized. In Vilnius, the capital, Sunni Muslims have spent years trying to secure a proper mosque, despite previously being granted land. Funding challenges, shifting political attitudes, and local resistance have slowed progress to a standstill. These ongoing struggles reveal a gap between Lithuania's secular, inclusive image and the practical difficulties experienced by its Muslim communities. Public acceptance, historical sensitivities, and uneven institutional support continue to shape how and where Islamic worship can exist within the country. Number 7. Poland. Poland is one of Europe's most religiously uniform nations, with Catholic identity woven deeply into its cultural fabric. Within this landscape, the country's small but steadily growing Muslim community has struggled to obtain recognition and secure spaces for worship, especially when attempting to build mosques. Efforts to establish new mosques in Warsaw and other major cities often run into immediate backlash. Opponents argue that Islam conflicts with Polish traditions or poses security concerns, claims that rarely come with evidence but still influence public debate. As a result, local officials regularly delay permits or deny them outright, citing zoning rules, safety codes, or technical requirements that function as quiet barriers. Community tensions occasionally spill into the streets. Proposals for Islamic centers have sparked protests that quickly escalated, leading to stalled projects and withdrawn applications. Most Muslim prayer spaces that exist today operate out of rented apartments or privately owned buildings rather than purpose-built mosques, underscoring how limited official support has been. Although Poland has not enacted an explicit ban, the obstacles are layered and persistent. Navigating multiple levels of government review, facing neighborhood opposition, and going through hearings shaped by fears of cultural change have made new construction extremely rare. The process, in practice, favors the dominant faith and leaves Muslim communities working through a system where progress is slow, uncertain, and often halted before it begins. Number 8, Italy. Italy has long grappled with disputes over mosque construction, a tension deeply tied to national debates about migration, cultural identity, and the changing face of modern Italian society. Even though the country is home to millions of Muslims, the number of officially recognized mosques remains remarkably small. Because of these restrictions, many Muslims worship in improvised spaces, converted warehouses, basements, community rooms, or storefronts, rather than in purpose-built religious centers. Strict regional laws, especially in places like Lombardy, impose layers of requirements, expanded parking, security assessments, detailed architectural plans, and urban planning approvals that are nearly impossible for small communities to navigate. For many, building a mosque is less about financing and more about battling an administrative wall. Proposals in major cities such as Milan and Bologna have repeatedly failed, driven by neighborhood protests, political pressure, and campaigns arguing that mosques threaten Italy's cultural character. Supporters of these regulations claim they are safeguarding heritage, while critics argue the policies mask discrimination and push religious practice into hidden, makeshift environments. Debates at the national level continue, with some leaders pushing for even tighter controls, reinforcing Italy's reputation as one of Western Europe's most difficult places to legally construct a mosque. As a result, the Muslim population may be growing, but their ability to build visible, permanent places of worship remains heavily restricted and shaped by a political climate resistant to change. Number 9, Switzerland. Switzerland is widely admired for its democracy and long-standing neutrality, yet its stance on Islamic religious architecture reveals a stricter, more guarded side of the country. In 2009, a nationwide vote approved a constitutional amendment banning the construction of new minarets, an unmistakable symbol of Islamic presence. The decision came from a population where Muslims make up only a small portion, but the referendum exposed deep cultural unease and captured global attention. Existing mosques are still allowed to operate, but attempts to build new centers or expand current facilities meet consistent resistance. Applications in cities like Geneva, Zurich, and Bern have been stalled or rejected, with officials citing zoning restrictions, heritage concerns, or the need to preserve Switzerland's traditional architectural landscape. Years later, little has shifted. Many Muslims continue worshiping in modest prayer rooms or converted spaces because constructing purpose-built mosques with minarets is effectively impossible. Local authorities in several cantons continue to deny permits, arguing that such buildings would disrupt cultural continuity or clash with regional identity. These policies do more than control skylines. They communicate who belongs and whose traditions are allowed to be seen. Switzerland's polished image as a fair and open democracy stands in contrast with the quiet but firm restrictions shaping how Islamic faith can appear in its public spaces. Number 10, Hungary. Hungary has positioned itself as a defender of what its leadership calls Christian Europe, a vision that strongly influences national policy, especially regarding Islamic institutions. Even though the country's Muslim population is small, government messaging consistently portrays Islam as a cultural and ideological challenge, shaping how authorities respond to mosque construction and public religious expression. Across the country, attempts to build mosques or Islamic prayer centers repeatedly run into rejection. Local councils rely on zoning clauses, heritage protections, and arguments about preserving the European architectural landscape to deny applications. In Budapest, proposals for an official prayer center have been turned down on the grounds that such structures would disrupt historic districts or undermine the nation's cultural identity. With purpose-built facilities blocked, many Muslims, foreign students, workers, and long-term residents gather in rented apartments, office spaces, or small community halls. Worship remains quiet and private, not because of preference, but because public religious development is discouraged. Statements from Prime Minister Viktor Orbán reinforce this stance, framing limits on mosque construction as part of a broader struggle to safeguard national values and resist ideological influence from outside Europe. This approach continues to shape policy. Muslims are permitted to live and work in Hungary, yet their presence is framed as temporary, with little encouragement for long-term integration or equal religious rights. Administrative hurdles, restrictive interpretations of planning rules, and strong political rhetoric make the establishment of new mosques nearly impossible without ever issuing an explicit legal ban. As a result, Islamic life in Hungary often unfolds behind closed doors. Prayer groups meet discreetly in repurposed spaces, highlighting how deeply cultural preservation and political ideology influence the ability of minority communities to practice their faith openly. Number 11. Greece. Greece's relationship with Islam is shaped by centuries of history, influenced heavily by its long period under Ottoman rule and its strong attachment to Greek Orthodox identity. For decades, this tension was most visible in Athens, which remained the only European capital without an officially recognized mosque, even though tens of thousands of Muslims lived in the city. Small prayer rooms and rented spaces filled the gap, but attempts to build permanent mosques ran into legal obstacles, zoning disputes, and heated political debate. When Athens finally opened a state-run mosque, the move marked progress but did not ease the larger restrictions. Across the country, local authorities frequently deny applications for new mosques, citing heritage protections, planning codes, or urban development concerns. As a result, many Muslims still pray in improvised spaces, basements, converted storefronts, and temporary halls rather than purpose-built religious centers. These challenges are even more pronounced in northern Greece, where a historic Muslim minority resides. Disputes continue over community properties, religious institutions, and the appointment of local leaders, reflecting long-standing sensitivities. Community groups report that approval processes remain slow and unpredictable, even in regions where Muslim populations have deep roots. By 2025, repeated permit rejections in cities like Thessaloniki and Crete fueled frustration among residents who feel their needs are consistently overshadowed by political caution. Greek officials maintain that their decisions protect cultural heritage and follow legal standards, while critics argue that these policies reflect lingering anxieties about history and a desire to protect Orthodox influence in public life. The result is a landscape where religious pluralism exists on paper, but the construction of mosques remains a complex and often contentious undertaking. Number 12. Slovakia. Slovakia holds one of the toughest stances in Europe toward Islam and the development of mosques, even though its Muslim population is extremely small. The country's strict approach became unmistakable when lawmakers passed legislation raising the threshold for a religion to gain official recognition, setting the requirement far above the size of the Muslim community. With fewer than 5,000 Muslims in the entire nation, meeting that standard is virtually impossible. Because Islam lacks official status, Muslims cannot legally build mosques, open accredited religious schools, or operate cemeteries under the same protections granted to recognized faiths. This has left Slovakia as the only EU member state without a single officially registered mosque. Worshippers instead gather quietly in rented halls, small apartments, or improvised rooms tucked away from public view. Officials defend the policy as a measure to safeguard cultural identity and prevent potential extremist influences. Critics, including rights groups and European observers, argue the laws were crafted specifically to exclude Islam from public life and contradict broader European principles of religious equality. For Slovakia's small Muslim population, daily practice depends on borrowed spaces and discreet gatherings. Their circumstances highlight how legal frameworks and cultural fears can limit religious expression, even in regions where freedom of belief is celebrated in principle. From Europe to Asia, the struggle to build a single mosque reveals far more than zoning rules or legal language. It exposes the deeper tensions shaping national identities, political priorities, and the place of minority faiths in public life. For many Muslim communities, the right to worship openly is still negotiated behind closed doors, filtered through fear, cultural pressure, and shifting definitions of belonging. And as these policies continue to evolve, the question of who gets to be visible and who must remain unseen remains at the heart of the debate. If you enjoyed this journey of faith, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more inspiring stories.